Welcome to Hope in the Future with Pastor Ben Foxworth. Check in with us here regularly to hear God's words of instruction and encouragement. And now, here's Pastor Ben.
Comfort is something that we all want. Our society places some pretty high value on comfort. There is a lot of money to be made on products that enhance all of the comfort that people seek. You know, you see the commercials for the memory foams or the My Pillows. You see, you know, what's the brand of that one recliner that's so popular? The Lazy Boy recliners for the living room. Nowadays, here, and in the year of 2021 AD, we now have body pillows and Snuggies. Comfort is important to us. As a matter of fact, I hate flying, and it's not because I hate flying because I'm scared of flying. I hate flying because of the discomfort of flying. It is uncomfortable, and I haven't flown post-COVID or whatever, so I haven't even gone through what people who have been flying over the last year have gone through. But I hate being uncomfortable on a plane for 6 to 8 hours. We like our comfort. We all do. I want you to imagine your comfortable place right now. What is your comfy zone? You all have one. You all have one. Maybe it's your favorite chair. Maybe it is your favorite morning to kind of sleep in. Maybe it is something that you watch as you're being made to feel comfortable. But I want you to think about your comfortable zone. And I want you to think about that comfortable zone. And do you agree with me that if you just stayed every single day, every single hour in that comfortable zone, that would probably be a bad thing? Wouldn't that be bad to be perpetually comfortable? Why would that be bad? It's small enough. Let's be interactive. Why would that be bad to be perpetually comfortable all the time? It's not healthy. It's selfish. We become kind of just more about ourselves. We don't grow. As a matter of fact, we get unhealthier. And it seems like we have continued to put more and more an emphasis on comfortable as our years go by. And you see that so many of the technological advances that happen are more about our convenience and comfort, it seems like, than any other things. And as we have become the most comfortable that we ever have in the history of civilization, what else has become comfortable, I think, sometimes is our faith. Our faith has followed suit in trying to be comfortable. As believers, as Christians, we can kind of get used to comfort too. We're blessed. God has really blessed us with this building as long as we have it, and we're blessed that we have a couple different air conditioners that are keeping it somewhat cool in here. And trust me, it could be a lot worse this morning at 7 a.m., right, Paul? But a lot of times we come to our buildings that are warm in the winter and they're somewhat air conditioned in the summer. We want to be comfortable. It's even our Bibles. Even our Bibles are soft. And I've always found it amusing that people in some countries are literally losing their heads for having a page of the Bible. But here, we have handles for our Bibles because our Bibles can be so heavy sometimes. We really want to be comfortable. A lot of churches now, they are doing everything they can to tell people when they come into a building to worship that they want them to be as comfortable as they can. So they do things like make sure that they have a coffee stand or make sure that there's coffee available and make sure that the chairs are always perfectly padded and climate-controlled atmosphere and all of that. And before you know it, in that desire to want to make people comfortable, because if we're not comfortable, then we're not necessarily going to want to stay. As we are continuing to be comfortable like this, pretty soon it's not just the chairs that are soft and padded. Pretty soon it's the messages. Pretty soon it's the teaching that is padded. The doctrine becomes lifeless. The doctrine becomes something that, we don't want to scare people. We don't want to overwhelm them. We don't want them to think that we're backwards. We want people to feel comfortable. And in doing so, sometimes the doctrine itself becomes lifeless, and eventually even the message of our Christ becomes just a bunch of moral mush. I was thinking about it, I remember a couple months ago I had a bowl of shredded wheat. Filled, the little, I don't know, it's not shredded wheat. Nobody eats shredded wheat anymore, the little squares. So I had the squares, poured the milk on it. Then I got to doing something and I completely forgot that I had poured myself a bowl of cereal. And by the time I got there, it was all just nothing but mush. And I think a lot of times that's what people are seeing when they're coming into our churches today. When our theology becomes, we want to make you more comfortable. Mark chapter 8, Jesus addresses this a little bit. Verse 34 through 38. Then he called to the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels." So as we're really a lot of times seeking comfort, what do people who are so used to comfort, what do they do with something like the cross? I mean, it's pretty hard to avoid the cross when we're a Christian, right? If we say that we're Christians, eventually we're going to need to deal with the message of the cross. What do we do with a phrase that Jesus is saying here when he says, "Take up your cross"? It's interesting because people will eventually find a way to make the cross comfortable. I was thinking about this as I was going through this. I was thinking about a big beanbag cross. The idea of we want a big old snuggly cross that we can just hold on to and just kind of hug, and it's all soft and it's perfect and memory foam and all of the beans that are in the beanbag, and just makes you feel just so warm and safe when you hold on to it. Sadly enough, that's what we see so much in so much teaching nowadays, is this concept of a comfortable idea of the cross. As a matter of fact, when we take the phrase, "We all have our crosses to bear," basically what they're saying is when Jesus says, "Take up your cross," and then when we say, we got to take up our cross to bear, do you know what usually people are talking about? Is something that has brought them a lot of discomfort. Sometimes even the most menial things that they're going, "Yeah, you know what? I get an ingrown toenail. That's my cross I have to bear. Yeah, I got a boss that doesn't listen to me as much as I'd like them to. That's the cross I have to bear." Which is a complete 180-degree misunderstanding of what Jesus was saying when he says, "Take up your cross." And as the cross gets pushed to the back of the sermons, as the cross gets taken out of Bible studies, maybe making an annual appearance at what wonderful holiday? Easter. Oh, it's Easter. We'll talk about the cross today. And even though it's on our churches, it's on our necklaces, our t-shirts, bumper stickers, we end up so much with a comfortable concept of the cross. But what else are we supposed to do? Think about it. You want to tell somebody about what Jesus has done. You want to tell somebody the gospel. The cross can be a tough sell. You know, it's bad enough Jesus had to die on the cross, but why did He go and insist that we have to end up on our own crosses? Isn't that kind of ruining Christianity's hope for decent public relations? I worked in public relations for a little while, and I have talked to so many consultants, and I always find it amusing. And this is one of those scriptures that I just imagine consultants at the time, if they were there, if they had Jesus' ear, if they would have said, Jesus, we need to rephrase that's a little bit of some of the things you're saying. Some of the things you're saying they're not easy to swallow for people. They're not comfortable with the concepts. When Jesus feeds the 5,000, and the next day they are so wanting more miracles, and then Jesus, who has this big crowd, and quite frankly, isn't that what we're going for, is big crowds? And He has this big crowd, but then Jesus says, nobody can be my follower unless they eat of my flesh and drink of my blood. And without understanding or wanting to understand what Jesus says, they just, that's uncomfortable, we're out of here. And the cross, doesn't that hinder our ability to bring new people to the faith? We're supposed to put our best foot forward, right? And we don't want, don't we want more people to come to Jesus? Because that's supposed to be the point, isn't it? Having more people come to Jesus. So we want to make following Christ to sound as appealing as possible. We want it to sound really nice, but what have we sacrificed in return? I think too many times, and how I was raised, and so many people will begin to think of this, is that instead of understanding the concept of sharing Christ with others, and what that means more is about what has Christ done in my life? What have I witnessed with Christ in my life? So many times people want to get into this concept of like a model or a business plan that they have to try to sell, or a program. In 1 Corinthians, Paul says, the message of the cross is foolishness for those who are perishing, but to those who are being saved, it is the power of God. For those living in that first century, the cross was an ultimate symbol of weakness. If you had at the time of Christ, if they had some kind of weird little time machine that they could see a window to us today and see how we just have crosses everywhere, they would be aghast. Because for many then and for many now, the message of the gospel that God came to earth in the form of a man and was crucified, that is complete foolishness. Because why would God use a symbol of torture? Why would God use this symbol of political death to save the world? I think the idea of the cross a lot of times appeals to us more because it's not used to execute people anymore. You don't, at least in any countries that I know of, you're not seeing people being crucified like this anymore, unless I know that there was some things where ISIS was doing that, trying to be ironic, but you don't really see that as a form of execution anymore. And so therefore it's a little easier for us to kind of soak it up, the cross. And we dress it up. And we're used to seeing a cross as an ornament or a decoration or a piece of jewelry. And if a first century Jew, as I was saying, would come in and they would see this, they would think we're sick. Imagine people walking around with I think it was Max Lucado who made this point, that we don't see people walking around with golden electric chairs around their necks, golden nooses. As a matter of fact, Miss Tina may have even helped put these out at Walmart. It always drives me crazy, and y'all have heard me talk about it. It drives me up the wall. We have chocolate crosses nowadays. You go into the holiday section there at the Walmart, and right there is chocolate crosses. Ooh, I would like a chocolate cross. But for the Jews, for the people that Jesus is talking to, the cross meant death. And that is the point. Because that's what makes the cross so beautiful. That God takes what from a human perspective is foolish, from what human perspective is weakness and criminal death. He chooses what has no glory. God chooses what carries no honor. If you are executed on a cross, you have no honor. And God finds the least likely symbol for love there is, and He says, I'll use that. God takes what the world says is ridiculous, demeaning, and shameful, and says, watch this. And He turns it into the power of salvation. 1 Corinthians 1:18, as I was saying, He turns the foolishness of the cross into the power of salvation. In verse 22 of 1 Corinthians 18, He says, Jews demand miraculous signs, and Greeks look for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. For the foolishness of God is wiser than man's wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than man's strength. Who else but God could take something that represents defeat and turns into a symbol of victory? He takes something that is about condemnation and pain and suffering, and He turns it into freedom, and He turns it into as symbols of healing and hope. He turns this something that represents this death, and He turns it into the symbol of life. And no one else but God can do that. And what seemed like this ultimate moment of weakness for Christ as He's in this world, the time when the enemy thought, okay, we've got this done. He's defeated. God has been defeated. God is weak. That's what that they thought at the cross at the time turns out to be the ultimate moment of God's strength. And why that matters, and I don't want you to miss this, because that's the whole point of what we're talking about this morning. It's so important. If there's only thing that you take away from this morning is what God has done for the image of the cross is what He offers to do for us. That when we are at the weakest, then we are at the lowest, that we are in a place of shame, where God can be the strongest. When you are weak, He is strong. God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. It's not that God used the cross in spite of its weakness. He chose the cross because of its weakness and what it represented. I love how Paul constantly talks about how God chooses these weak things, because throughout all of Scripture, God continually chooses the weak over the strong. Abraham, he's old. Jacob, insecure. Leah, unattractive. Joseph was humiliated. Moses stuttered. Gideon was poor. Samson was proud. Rahab was immoral. David had an affair. Elijah was suicidal. Jeremiah was depressed. Jonah was disobedient. Naomi was a widow. John the Baptist was eccentric. Peter was impulsive and hot-tempered. Martha worried a lot. The Samaritan woman had several failed marriages. Zacchaeus was extremely unpopular. Thomas had doubts. Timothy was timid. And Paul, not only did Paul have bad health, but Paul had a horrible reputation as the persecutor of the very people that he is seeking to edify. And yet all of these people we see God use for His glory. God used the shamed, the weak, the sick for His glory. God gave the message of the newborn Christ to who? The most popular people of the time, the generals, the kings, the leaders, right? He gave it to the shepherds, unclean shepherds that couldn't even step inside a place of worship because they were so unclean. The Bible is a long list of imperfect misfits who discovered that their weakness is made strong because of Him. And so, we ask God to do for us what He did for the cross. Because it's interesting. Because contrary to what the world says, contrary to what we so many times have tried to tell ourselves, that when we start thinking that we're strong, when we start thinking that we have it all together, and when we start saying, yeah, I could see why God would use me, that's actually when we're at our weakest. But when we acknowledge our weakness, and when we humble ourselves before the Lord, we put ourselves in a position to receive His strength. And Paul talks more about this truth in his second letter to the Corinthians. In chapter 12, verses 9 and 10, he says, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Paul says that he delights in his weakness. Paul says because when he's weak, that's when he knows that God has given him strength. We don't naturally delight in our weaknesses. We've been taught not to do that. But in fact, as a matter of fact, we go into great lengths to disguise our weaknesses. I think about like when you go to a job interview and they ask a dreaded question, what's your greatest weakness? How do you answer that? I've been in a few different positions where I have interviewed people for jobs, and it is amusing that when that question comes up, people will always usually do one of two answers. One of the things they don't do, let me tell you what I have never heard and what you probably shouldn't do, is you don't actually tell them your weakness. Because if you do, you're not going to get hired. You don't say, well, you know what? Yeah, weakness. I have trouble getting, I sleep in every day. I have trouble getting to work on time. When somebody gives me something, I usually procrastinate it for quite a while before, and I have trouble getting that done. I don't get along with coworkers. I am one who is very difficult to deal with. I don't even know how to turn on my computer. You don't say those things at a job interview, do you? But you got to say something. So what do you say? Well, what we have been trained to do is that we take our weaknesses and we try to make them sound more like a strength. So what's a weakness? And these are the ones that I've heard. Well, I can be quite a perfectionist. When I just want to make sure everything gets done in as good a way as it can. And it's always interesting that people think that they're the first ones to ever come up with that somebody would be like, did you hear that? I asked him for his weakness and he gave me a strength. Or, what the other one is I'm a workaholic. Once I start, I can't stop. Now, why do we do that? Why would we say that? Because in our world, in this economy that we live in, weakness is not strength. Strength is strength. And so we have to even try to turn our weaknesses. We have to actually hide our weaknesses and try to use some of our strengths and try to make it look like they might be a weakness. And that's what we do. Did you know every year there are 2,000, at least 2,000 self-help books published by a major publisher? And all of them have one message. You can do it. You have what it takes. Look deep and find that strength within yourself. There's even a lot of books that you can find at Christian bookstores that have that message. But Paul says our strength only comes when we realize our weakness. When my children were little, or my grandchildren now, if we're on a little bit of a walk, eventually, small children will realize, I can't go any. This walk is very long. And what will they do? They'll want me to pick them up. They want to depend on my strength because they know they can't walk anymore. I love doing that. And it's breaking my heart that my granddaughters are getting so big and it's becoming fewer and fewer times. But it's a great picture. We want to admit our weaknesses. I want to ask God to show strength in my life. I want to be able to say to God, God, I am too weak to do this. I can't do this. I want to up to God. I want to see His strength in my life. I want God to do for me what He's done for the cross. It's part of our pride that we like to carry our own loads around, and then we like to refuse to admit weaknesses. But the cross makes it clear that when I'm weak, when you are weak, when we are weak, He is strong. And that is a test for believers. Christ does not ever, that we see in the Word, tell us to do something that He doesn't do first. And Christ, before us, trusted God enough Do you trust God enough to let your weakness be His strength? Because it's when we let go of our need for comfort, when we let go of our need to be in control, or our need to be glorified in our accomplishments or our strengths or our paychecks or our trophies or our people in our life, their approval or whatever. It's that what keeps us from understanding what the cross is about. It keeps us from understanding that the cross is not about being a comfortable, cozy experience. When we let go of these things, that's when God does in our lives what He did in Christ's death. And it's then that God does in our hearts what He's done for the cross. And He takes followers, He takes believers who are hanging by a thread, and He bolsters their spirits. And He takes these followers who are at their weakest moment, and He uses it for ultimate kingdom good. He takes followers who are all but defeated, and He turns their testimonies into these life-giving messages of truth and hope, and it is all for His glory. So whatever your lives look like, whatever you think your futures look like, understand something, that when we say, I am weak, but He is strong, that's when we get to see what God does in our lives. That's when we see that blessing of God moving in our lives, using our very weaknesses for His strength. I find it interesting that a lot of times people's spiritual gifts, when they're not being used for God, actually can sometimes be a weakness for them. for whatever reason. But when we give these things over, when we say, this is all of me, there's none of me here. I need to give it all to you, God. That's when He empowers us in ways. And we've all experienced it here. I know everybody here. We've all experienced God's incredible empowerment. So let's not worry about trying to make the cross more comfortable for us to understand. Let's not worry about trying to make sure that people understand. People need to know your story. And your story is that you were weak. But because of Him, He has made you strong in Him. That is going to be more effective than if any book that I can give you, any program that I can put you through, any tried and true system. That is the message of God. Shaming the strong and building the weak. The first will be last, and the last will be first.